Alright everybody, hello and welcome back to another episode in the Mixer as we continue our season previews for the Hyundai A-League season, which starts this weekend. Today I'm joined by Melbourne Heart Foundation member and long-time Melbourne City fan, Humo Blanco himself, Michael Callanan. How are you, mate?
Very good, mate. Good to hear your voice. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, man. For those of you that are listening for the first time, aren't familiar with Michael and myself, we have been friends for a very, very, very long time. Both Foundation Melbourne Heart members. But I'll do my best throughout this episode to keep my host hat on and let you be the fan.
Sounds good, mate. Sounds good.
All right, so Melbourne City initially came into the Hyundai A-League as an expansion club in the 2010-2011 season, then as Melbourne Heart, based out of La Trobe University in Bundoora in Melbourne's northern suburbs. They are, of course, now owned by the City Football Group, who purchased the club 5 years ago. It feels like it's absolutely flown by. To this date, they only have one FFA Cup triumph in 2016, a game that both Michael and I were at. What are some of your fondest memories, Mick, of both our time as Melbourne Heart and then again since the City Football Group actually took over the club?
Well, mate, Melbourne Heart was great. I remember, obviously, being in the crowd was a great time back then with the Heart and, developing the crowd and all that sort of stuff. And, we had our Harry Kuehl and a few things like that, and it's good sort of after moving from Western Australia, working over there a bit, it was good to sort of have a team to support and take the nephew along and see the mates there and catch up. So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
Enjoyed that time with the Heart, and and then I suppose City taking over was really exciting at the start, and we've had a bit of a lull, I suppose, and I suppose we've always got a bit of aspirations, that you could say.
It did used to feel like it was a lot easier being a Melbourne Heart fan because the stadium only had about 2,000 people in it. You got to change heads and sit pretty much wherever you wanted to. We had to sit through things like Michael Mifsud, Patrick Gerhardt wearing that horrible Kappa turtleneck in the middle of summer, which was horrendous.
Eli
Babal, he's still only 25. He might be back. Don't jinx it. He'll end up turning up someplace.
Don't talk about being back, mate. I'm happy about Curtis. He's back.
Yeah, I know. We'll go through the full list of everyone that's come through, but good to see. I think after Stefan Mork left at the end of last season, we didn't have anyone remaining on the books that had ever represented Melbourne Heart. There's probably an exception to that rule that I've completely forgotten, but Curtis Good coming back home to where he started his career. Nice and exciting to keep at least one connection. It's an interesting conversation. What do you think the City Football Group have done? I actually don't think they've done a horrible job, obviously incorporating the silhouette of the Heart logo into the Melbourne City logo and, obviously retaining the red and white stripes each season. How good a job do you think they've done in, like paying homage back to the initial Melbourne Heart period, that 3 or 4 years where we were, cellar dwellers of the league and kind of an upstart within Melbourne as a town?
Yeah, I think we've gained positives from the City Group for sure, and I think most notably infrastructure and more professionalism within training and the coaching and all that sort of stuff, and they've done pretty well in that sort of thing, and I suppose they've got, because they're the City Football Group, there's a lot of expectations there for how our league is with the salary cap and that sort of. From what they're able to do, they've done pretty well, I think. Yeah.
I think in terms of the standards that they've set regarding facilities, particularly training facilities, the City Football Academy, based in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, it really set a standard for a lot of different clubs around the league. We now see similar, academies and training setups for the likes of Melbourne Victory, for the likes of Sydney FC, and the clubs that are set consistently now performing in that top 4 are the ones that have made the biggest investment in their own facilities and ensuring that their day-to-day business operations and training grounds and all that sort of stuff are at a world-class elite level, which even though football isn't perhaps the number 1 sport in Australia, we have always had really high levels of sports scientists and physiotherapy and training venues and things like that, because we do prioritise sport and sport funding so incredibly high. So I think they deserve a ton of credit for elevating football-specific conditioning to another level and football-specific facilities. And then obviously I think they've been rewarded a couple of times now in the sales of Aaron Moy and now Daniel Arzani, who we'll talk about a little bit further.
Yeah.
So their investment's already been repaid, and if they can continue unearthing a player like that every 3 or 4 years, which they consistently try and do by picking up the best young talent available, they will continue to turn what has been a relatively frugal purchase and turning Melbourne Heart into Melbourne City into continued rewards and continued money for them.
Well, that's it. Yeah, exactly. And like you're going to touch on McGree. He could be one of those.
Yeah, definitely. And Lockie Wales as well, who's been picked up in the off-season, I think potentially is going to be great. So we'll go through the last couple of seasons and how we've done. The 13-14 season was our last one as Melbourne Heart. We finished 10th that year. The only highlight was David Williams scoring 12 goals. In the 14-15 season, the first of the City Football Group, we finished in 5th spot, 15-16 in 4th position, 16-17 in 4th again, and then last season, our highest ever league finish, 3rd in the league and a semi-final loss away to Newcastle Jets. What were your thoughts on last season, and do you think it was an accomplishment for us to get our highest finish ever, or do you think expectations have grown that we should be challenging for a top 2 position every year under the City Football Group?
Yeah. Well, my thoughts on last season, it was pretty good. Like, I suppose do you want to go through the highlight? The highlight I could probably say was, what was it, round 2, when Timmy got the Thunderbolt and we won 4-1 against Victory.
Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning to the audience listening in as well that Tim Cahill absolute fucking barnstormer that we'll see on highlights packages from now until the end of time for the A-League. I was busy at the bar at the Etihad Stadium getting Michael and I a fresh round of, I think, whiskey and cokes at the time. So one of the greatest moments in Melbourne City history, and I missed it because I was purchasing alcohol. But we proceeded to get as drunk as humanly possible as Fernando Brandan and Bruce Kamau ran amok for the rest of the game.
Yeah. Yeah, and then to finish the highlights, I suppose you've got to, even though we lost it, you've got to talk about that game against Perth that we lost 5-4, and it was to play off for the home final, and we were losing 4-1 in the 75th minute, and I think Fitzgerald scored to make it 5-4 the loss, and we got the home final. So that was a pretty epic game. I think that equaled the A-League's top amount of goals scored in a game, the 9 goals. That was pretty epic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the tough part about the semi-final loss is that we started really well, and in the first 15 minutes went a goal up, and then kind of just Warren Joyce. We'll talk about him a little bit further down, the run sheet and whatever. But we kind of tried to shut up shop a little bit, and then we conceded a goal that was very scrappy and really could have gone either way. Of course, it fell to Jason Hoffman, ex-Melbourne Heart and Melbourne City player. And then if you're going to get eliminated by a scorpion kick from an 18-year-old prodigy at the top of the box,
Well, I think that's what levelled it. It was we were looking pretty good, and then the scorpion levelled us, and then I think the Hopper Wonderland got up the Newcastle fans, and then that was the end of our season.
Crazy. It's
Hopper got it was Hopper. It was Hopper, mate. He got the final win.
Yeah, it's one of those tough ones because you kind of look at that goal again and again, and you kind of have to say...
Yeah, that's all you remember from the game, is that goal. It's just ridiculous. And look at us now. Now we went and bought him, or we loaned him?
We loaned him. But for that goal to at least be mentioned in the Push Cash Award, I know there was some phenomenal bicycle kicks and things like that, and Gareth Bale's goal was obviously amazing in the Champions League final. But Riley McGree, I dare say we're going to be listening to that commentary and that oh my goodness from Brenton Speed from now until the rest of time. And I think it speaks volumes that we went out and immediately signed him.
Yeah, exactly. That's all it's kind of.
Yeah. So by the same token, what do you think was the greatest frustration of the 17-18 season?
Well, I suppose I think was probably not getting the Asian Cup spot, because that would have been pretty fun to have a go in the Asian sort of Champions sort of league, and that's probably my main frustration. Other than that, reasonably happy, and I suppose I suppose my main disappointment, you could say, is not just last year, but just losing games that we shouldn't lose, like those disappointing losses. They're not something I don't really like.
Yeah, it was an interesting one because the start of last season, while Warren Joyce was kind of picking up the team and trying to work out the best shape and formation in this squad and everything, we kind of masked some pretty average performances in that by the fact that Ross McCormack just kept dragging us through games 1-0. He actually left with 14 goals in 15 appearances, I believe it was, which is a pretty phenomenal strike rate, even for that low amount of games.
Slotting them.
Yeah, I think the greatest frustration is that we had that period and we started probably our best start in the recent league memory that I can think of, and then it just kind of faded away again through that middle portion of the league. Games like the one that you mentioned to get Perth, while hugely entertaining, you don't necessarily see the great teams like the Sydney FCs, the Melbourne Victories, Brisbane Roar going further down the track ever lose those ones. If they get into a scrap like that, they usually come out on top, and I think that's what's been lacking for us the last sort of 12 to 18 months. But having said that, reading through our last 5 league positions, you do see us getting incrementally better every year. And I do hope that Warren Joyce is a little bit better and smarter about the league and knows what he wants to do, being his second season now. And really, I think the pressure on him is massive this season to kind of elevate us again up into those top 2 positions.
Yeah, that's it. And I suppose to finish on last year as well, like Azani was a pretty good shining light, you could say.
Yeah, I think we'll probably dedicate a whole bunch of time to young Daniel, and one, how he's going at the moment over with Celtic, and two, the impact that he had on the season last year. So I'll just touch quickly on our FA Cup results and then our pre-season results. We were eliminated in the quarterfinals by Western Sydney Wanderers 2-1. I was actually at this game, and I think most people that watched it would be amazed at how we weren't able to find a victory. We were undone by essentially a set piece with Oriol Riera scoring from a corner, and then a pretty scrappy defensive shape and structure for a counter-attacking goal, which essentially was finished off by a player walking the ball into an empty net. Given that it was the first competition that we ever won and the first trophy in our history, how frustrating do you think it is to fall to essentially what is a team that most sides, I think, will be beating this year?
Yeah, well, it is, I suppose, but like, is it now? Is everyone else's mind on winning other stuff now, like pre-season sort of thing? Like, I feel like a lot of clubs sort of have done that over the time of the FFA Cup, just because it's in the pre-season. Like you do see a few bigger clubs like go out early, and like it is disappointing, definitely, but. Like now we're out, I suppose you got to look to the future, don't you?
Yeah, I think the weird one is though for us, like the team that started that game, there's probably only 1 or 2 players that we've added since then. Like we've been paying the majority of our squad of 23 since the start of August, pretty much. So by the time the lineup that we had in that game probably won't be that different to the lineup this weekend for round 1. Whereas a lot of other teams that we've seen, because they operate on smaller budgets and they don't necessarily have the funding or the backing, they really don't make a whole lot of signings until the month before the season starts because they can't afford to pay them the extra weekly wage or the extra monthly wage or whatever it is. So it's just one of those things that I think if we were having this conversation with Melbourne Heart, we'd be like, oh yeah, whatever, it happens. We performed well, we'll get better. But because it's Melbourne City now, like everything has that tinge of extra expectation to it. And I think that kind of, it echoes around the league a little bit more as well. So in our other friendlies, we're undefeated against A-League opposition. We've had 1 draw and 3 wins. We did also play Western Sydney Wanderers this past weekend and smashed them 4-1 in Shepparton, which was apparently a very good performance. Probably the low light is that we had a very heavy 6-0 loss in a pre-season tournament in India to La Liga team Girona FC, who are also partly owned by the City Football Group. I think it just goes to show that while we continue to make progression in the A-League and in that particular scope, we are still a long way from being, I think a continental power, and hopefully the next step is qualifying for Asia, and then once we qualify for Asia, we can start, strengthening and building our program a little bit better.
Yeah, we're no FIFA Club World Cup yet, I don't think.
No, Club World Cup. That's when we get to it. I think that's what we'll eventually get to, where all the City Football Group teams, New York, Manchester, what is the other one? Yokohama Marinos, us, and Girona are all representing different countries and different continental competitions. So it'd be interesting to see if that ever comes to fruition or not.
Yeah, well, that's it. Let's see what the future holds.
So we might as well go through some of the players that have gone out. A couple of them we'll just touch on briefly, and then there's a couple others we probably want to unpack a little bit further. I know a couple of your favourites have moved on. The first one being Christian Cavallo, who was a left back / left midfielder that I think just struggled to get beyond Scott Jameson in the pecking order for the particular team. Do you have any memories of Christian Cavallo, or pretty much just what we'd seen?
I don't really know. Like, I don't really like. I couldn't give you any information on him now.
Yeah, the only thing I really know about him is what I've seen in Football Manager or FIFA, because he's always in the squad and about the place, but never, never really bothering anybody in the first team. He's a low bronze, if anyone wants to talk in FIFA Ultimate Team descriptions. The next two, actually, let's tie these three together. So Nick Fitzgerald, Bruce Kamau, and Ruan Tonjic have all headed to Western Sydney Wanderers. Only Fitzgerald played against us in the
Adelaide
FA Cup game. All the Adelaide boys move on. Well, Nick Fitzgerald, I think, came across initially to us from Central Coast, but he has played for quite a few different teams now. What are some of your fondest memories of those three?
Yeah. Well, I love Fitzy. Probably when we went to Adelaide, that's a great memory. When was that? I think that was 2 years ago when he scored that winner.
Yeah, he cut back in on his left peg and smacked it into the top corner for a 1-0 win.
That's probably my best memory of Fitzy, making my Adelaide trip great. And then, Bruce obviously fast. A bit disappointing. Last year, everyone was hoping he'd get onto the goals, but he didn't really. So
he started last.
I think he's still pretty promising, and yeah.
He started last season on fire. He scored, of course, in that derby that we spoke about earlier, and was phenomenal the entire game. And then I think the next round out, he got 2 goals against Brisbane Roar in a 2-0 win. And everyone kind of talked about, hey, is this the time that Bruce Kamau is going to take his game to another level? And I think Warren Joyce even said if he makes good on his potential, he could be playing championship football at the end of the year. But he just, as soon as those words kind of came out and the pressure and expectation increased, he just went into his shell. And I don't think we ever saw an A-League quality performance out of him again after that. And he very quickly lost his spot to Nick Fitzgerald.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think Tongic goes in the same boat. He had all the physical tools, but he just never, whether his own fault or the fault of management or not getting enough opportunities, just never found consistent enough form to nail down a spot. And obviously with the Michael Jakobsen being club captain last year and the emergence of Bart Schenkerveld as one of the elite defenders in the competition, it was always going to be tough for any player really to try and break into that central defensive partnership.
Yeah, exactly. The Yak is gone.
So the other one that's left is Manny Muscat, who's returned to NPL football in Victoria. Probably, I wasn't the biggest fan of Manny Muscat, but probably the winner of our goal of the season competition last year with that phenomenal strike against Newcastle Jets, the volley.
Well, I remember him. Did he also score that massive running goal against us a few years ago?
He might have. I don't really remember. He was a player that I think everybody watched at Wellington when he was part of that really good backline with Durante and Ben Sigmund and whoever else. And then he came to us on a 3-year deal or a 2-year deal at the time, despite being 33. And I just don't think he ever really reached those heights again, other than a couple of half-decent Melbourne Derby performances. He was more of a defensive liability than anything else.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, but he was like reasonably solid at the back, though. I'll give him that. I wasn't too disappointed in him. And
the tough part is you never see what goes on like day to day on the training track and stuff. He may have been a really good mentor for the likes of Nathaniel Atkinson or Dylan Pereos or whoever else we have coming through in those fullback positions.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So the next one, and this next run, I think stings a little bit more. Michael Jakobsen has his contract finished, and he immediately signed for pretty much the day the season ended. Adelaide United. What are some of your favourite memories of the Big Yak, and how much do you think he'll be missed within the team?
Well, yeah, mate, another one that was extremely solid at the back, and he pretty much ran the back, didn't he? Captained it, and he was good. He was good.
And not forgetting his bicycle kick on debut against Western Sydney Wanderers a couple of years ago in the FFA Cup.
Yes, I do remember that.
He did have his injury issues, though. I think one of his big complaints was that the pitch that City trained on was really hard underneath, and he was used to, obviously playing in Scandinavia for most of his career, having, really soft pitches. So he had a lot of calf issues, a lot of thigh strains, things like that. Be interesting to see how his fitness improves in Adelaide, because when he's on, he's a quality player. The next one, and this one stings me quite a bit because I was a massive fan of him, Stefan Mork has moved to Brisbane. Not just moved to Brisbane, he's gone back, they've signed him via a transfer fee from NEC, his Dutch club in the Eredivisie. How important do you think Stefan Mork was for us last season?
He was extremely important, and he kind of, ran the midfield like Moy did, and yeah, he was good. He was really good as well, and I suppose what have we've signed a couple of midfielders, have we, or Riley McGree or something, and they think that he was easy enough to not try and sign from the loan. So yeah, I suppose I wish him luck as well. And you know what we got him for, what we swapped him for Malik and got him back from Adelaide, and that was it Malik? What was Malik?
Nah, so we got Malik to get rid of Mork. So he was probably the
yeah,
only,
we got rid of him, yeah, and then he came back after that.
He was the only person, I think, that would have been... He was just held back by the fact that we had Aaron Moy at that time, obviously now playing in the Premier League with Huddersfield and tearing it up, because we had Partaloo that year, we had pretty much Moy just doing whatever they wanted, and then further forward up the pitch we had the likes of Harry Navio, Bruno Fornaroli. We had a very good team at the time. Then with that trade, bringing in Osama Malik to give us a little bit more defensive cover for some injuries that we had, sending him the other way, he walked pretty much straight into that Adelaide setup, into that system, in a more preferred role, and I think played a massive role in them going through and winning the title. So all he really needed was that opportunity to show what he could do outside of what was a very, Bruno Fornaroli, Aaron Moy-centric Melbourne City at the time. Got his big money move over to Europe. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for him. I'm not sure what the issues were there, whether it was attitude or fitness, or he just didn't assimilate that well into the Dutch culture. But I thought he was probably one of our better performers last year, and certainly I think a massive, massive, massive signing for Brisbane. So while I hope he doesn't play well against us, I do hope his career continues to kick on and that he eventually gets another opportunity in Europe, because he's one of the few players in the league, I think, that could probably break into that, Socceroos 4 or 5 central midfielders, given we are so deep in that area.
Exactly, yeah. Good luck to him. Good luck.
So next one, our marquee signing from last year, Marcin Brudzinski returns to Cracovia in Poland. I think his main highlight was the fact that he'd play piano in the reception of pretty much any hotel we were staying at, and he was a phenomenal pianist because they showed it every week on social media. What were your what was your read on Brudzinski, and why don't you think he necessarily worked out last year as a relatively unknown marquee?
Well, I was reasonably excited. He looked pretty solid and strong, and yeah, I suppose he couldn't work it out, and then he got injured, and they thought they'd keep it. They were thinking of getting rid of him halfway through, and then they kept him, and yeah, it just never worked out, did it?
Yeah, I think we didn't really play with like a conventional number 10, and that was what he envisioned himself as being when he came across. Like, I know in his own history he was a bit of a holding midfielder and everything, but I think Joyce was pretty set in the lineups that he was going to play with the likes of Luke Bratton, obviously, who's a fantastic player, Neil Kilkenny, Osama Malik. I think he had what he wanted from the structure available, and then Budzinski was just almost, a luxury player. Because if we go through and look at the international signings particularly, made as Melbourne Heart, and then how the quality of them since Melbourne City took over in their vast scouting network, he definitely had enough about him. I remember one away game in Brisbane, he came off the bench when we were a goal down and got a goal and an assist of his own. So there was definitely potential there. It's just one of those strange ones that never really worked out, and I think it was just down to he was never what the manager wanted.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe he didn't really get along with everyone as well, but I suppose being a pianist, you'd think everyone would have a soft spot for him.
You think he'd have a more delicate touch, given how soft his hands must have to be. So the next one is Oli Bozanic. We signed him midway through the season. Interestingly enough, signed him as a central midfield replacement. He played a lot of games ahead of Budzinski, so they're kind of tied together a little bit. His contract was not renewed at the end of last season, and he's now moved to Hearts in the Scottish Premiership. What are your thoughts on Oli Bozanic? I think, for me, the worst thing that ever happened in his career is the fact that he went to Melbourne Victory under a marquee deal, and he's just never really been that sort of player. He's a great player, but he's more...
He is really good. And, it just didn't work out for him, did he? And, he's a good midfielder. He's really good. He's played for Australia, hasn't he? So, there's something in him.
Yeah, and he was part of that really, really good Central Coast Mariners side of the early part of this decade as well that was very, very strong. I think maybe it might be tied to one of the players that we've picked up and already spoken about. I think if we had that Riley McGree deal signed early in the transfer window, it probably didn't bode that well for Oli Bozanic. They're both very similar types of players, and I think Riley McGree has the higher upside in terms of, potential ability. and it'll be interesting to see if his loan deal goes well.
Yeah, he's a bit younger too, is he?
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if there's anything attached to that deal that may see McGree join on a permanent transfer, either maybe not directly to us, but maybe to Manchester City potentially. The next one,
Yeah.
the next two actually, are loan deals that have gone out to Europe, which is very strange to see players going out on loan. Denny Jonro, central midfielder who had pretty limited opportunities last season, albeit that he is very young, and Dean Buzanis. Like him or loathe him, Buzanis played a lot of games and had some decent performances for us last year. They've both joined ex-Melbourne Heart and Melbourne City manager John Van Schip at PEC Zwolle in the Dutch Eredivisie. What are your thoughts on players joining on loan from the A-League, and what do you think's driving that?
Well, I don't know. I suppose what's driving that? It'd be interesting to see, well, like, you know, where with other clubs, like if they've had players that have gone and on loan as well out there. But I suppose like the main thing that's driving it would be the connection with Van Schip, and like, you know, there's these two are probably Dean's already been over there. Dennis, I think, still young, and you know they just want to probably maybe try Europe again, and they've been selected to head over there or whatever.
Yeah, so Genro's apparently playing quite a bit in that first team. Like, still not starting every game or anything, but he's got a good few appearances for him so far this season. And he was actually called up into the most recent Socceroos squad as well, despite only being, 18, potentially 19 now. I don't know off the top of my head. But it'd be really interesting to see if he continues to have a good season.
He's a City youth, isn't he?
Yeah, he came through. I believe he has French parents, so he's got a French passport, and I think Buzanis has a Greek passport, so there's no work limitations for either of them.
Yeah,
but
no.
Be interesting to see if he does kick on a bit, if he comes back to Melbourne City, obviously already being signed on as part of the City Football Group, or if one of the Dutch sides actually places a permanent bid for him to give him an opportunity over there. But we didn't see a lot of him, only a couple of substitute appearances here and there, but he looks to have really kind of made good on some of his potential in the last off-season. And it'll be interesting to see how the Buzanis one works out as well, given that he is 27 years old. Not old for a goalkeeper, but certainly not a youth prospect by any means.
No, exactly. And what I think is his girlfriend over here still.
Steph Catley.
That might be something that, yeah.
I think they're together. I've only heard that said out loud. I've not seen any evidence myself, but she obviously a phenomenal player for the W League side, and also plays half of her year in North America in the NASL. So I don't know, maybe long distance can work. I don't know what flights are like.
He's only on loan. He might come back and join the Caceres.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows, mate? We're just slowly putting together families of footballers, for the better or for worse. So the next one, obviously, I think the biggest transfer out for us last season, Daniel Arzani. He had signed for Manchester City on, I think, a 4-year deal, and then immediately signed a 2-year loan with Celtic in the Scottish Premiership. Firstly, what were your thoughts on his emergence as a first-team player last year? Obviously still very raw, but really a fairy tale if you're going to call him like an Australian Alex Hunter almost, doing his own FIFA journey, making the World Cup squad and then getting his big money move overseas. What were your thoughts on his emergence?
Yeah, he was massive. Definitely has the X factor, and it's good to see people take players on and have a real dip and have a go. And I think he's got that in him. And I think that early on bit of discipline they done helped him a lot, and then I think now he's sort of that's helped him, but maybe that sort of helped train on what's happening now, and they're all riding off that discipline instead of just letting him have a play.
Yeah, it was a real slow burn with him. He didn't come into the team until a third of the way through the season, and then I think it was pretty much he wasn't able to get through a full 90 minutes for the longest time. His conditioning wasn't quite there yet, but he is almost it's weird to say, but he's almost a very un-Australian player in the way that he is, ostensibly a dribbler and a finisher, more of a proper inside forward than the classic wingers that we've made in the mould of Harry Kewell and Brett Emmerton and the likes. Even Lecky and stuff right now aren't quite the same style of player that he happens to be.
And you even noticed at the World Cup when he was on, you could just he also had a different style there as well. You could just tell even for that few minutes he was on.
Yeah, and I think that really suits him. It's a weird thing to say, but I think where he's at right now, still only being 19, it really suits him coming off the bench, playing on a wing that was, Robbie Cruz, who just kept taking pretty much the safe option every time he had the ball and retaining possession, to immediately subbing him onto that side and giving the fullback something completely different to deal with in terms of a player looking to dribble and looking to go past a man. Like that, I think his development can be really well served by that. But what are your thoughts on the loan to Celtic? I initially thought he'd sign for Man City and maybe spend one more season in the A-League before going over as a 20-year-old, just so that he can get, consistent 90 minutes each week. What are your thoughts on the Celtic move and how it's working out for him so far?
Yeah, well, I think like what you're saying, was probably a good idea as well. But going over there with Tommy Rogic, and yeah, I thought at the start it was a really good idea. Why not? And I was probably more inclined. I was thinking maybe you'd go into the football league, like in the division below, and do something like what Moy done or something. But obviously not the same player, but go to a lower club down there and have a go. But yeah, going to Celtic, I thought that he'd have a bit of an opportunity. But yeah, I don't think he's even had minutes, has he?
No, he's only
played
played
in the reserve side, and he's been. I think they've done pretty well in the reserve side, but yeah, Rogers isn't giving him a go.
So not even the reserve side. They're under 20s at this stage, and I think he's still yet to. And we are already in October. He's yet to play a full 90 minutes for that team. So be interesting to see if that continues. I'm not sure what the intentions were for Man City, and if they're quite happy to let the 2 years play out at Celtic, because obviously he's only 19. He's not going to, like, spades are spades. Celtic are a very good team. Celtic would be a step up from any side in the A-League. I don't think he was ever going to walk in and immediately be involved in their first team structure. But whether Manchester City intended it to go a little bit differently in terms of his exposure or in terms of a bench role or something like that, it would be interesting to see what happens in January and at the end of the season. It may potentially be, if you want to keep your fingers crossed or toes crossed or whatever else you've got that you can cross, you may see him back in the A-League in the next 12 to 18 months, albeit on loan, given that he is on a long-term contract at Man City. But as we've seen with the likes of Caceres and Bratton, they're more than happy to continue loaning back players to the A-League until they can find permanent homes.
Yeah, exactly. It's good, and I suppose he definitely has the most potential that we've seen in the last couple of years. So yeah. Absolutely wish him the best for sure.
And obviously we're very biased, but I think even going beyond the Melbourne City side, I think he's probably the highest potential youngster developed in the A-League. And I do say potential because obviously there's been some absolute phenomenal players come through, the likes of Matt Ryan, Matt Leckie, Tom Rogic. But I think if you look at the way Arzani plays the game and what he could potentially be, definitely a massive find for Australian football. So hopefully it does all work out for him and he gets over this little hump at Celtic because it's for the best for Australian football overall. All right, so contracts extended, only 2 during the off-season. Everybody's favourite player to hate or player to love, depending on your stance. Osama Malik has signed a 1-year contract extension, and we've also extended the loan of Luke Bratton. I think he's now in his final year of that 5-year contract he signed with Manchester City when he left from Brisbane Roar. What are your thoughts on the re-signing of those 2 players, and how important do you think they are to the squad itself?
Yeah, Bratton is very important. I like him. Like, he's pretty defensive midfielder, isn't he? And he does pretty well there. And yeah, Osama's I suppose he's a bit more attacking than Osama is, but they're both pretty good in their solidity. And yeah, they don't Osama doesn't have much creativity, I don't think, and yeah, I suppose they're worth it. Yeah, of course they're worth it.
Yeah, so I don't know, I don't mind Osama Malik. I think he's serviceable, but I don't think he's in our strongest 11 at any point or in any position. He's not quite a centre-back, no. He's not quite a holding midfielder, but for me, Luke Bratton is, at an A-League level at least, an elite deep-lying playmaker and gives you a lot of... there's a lot that he can do very well. You can either drop out having that sort of midfield enforcer or that midfield anchor that we have picked one up during the off-season and just play with a deep-lying playmaker and more advanced players in front of him, or you can play him alongside someone and have him be the chief creator, which we've seen him do to great effect in many a game over the last few seasons that we've been lucky enough to have him. So now we get to move to the exciting ones. We get to go and talk about the players in, of which there are some interesting signings. The first one, Michael O'Halloran, has joined from Rangers. Came across direct. It was on a free, but obviously Steven Gerrard, ex-Liverpool legend, taking over at that club, deemed him surplus to requirements, and we've managed to pick him up. He's only made a handful of couple of appearances, and he has unfortunately picked up a relatively long-term injury. Have you seen much of him throughout the preseason so far?
I haven't, no. I heard he's reasonably fast though, and I'm always happy to have fast players.
Yeah, 93 pace on FIFA, which I know is the one that a lot of people listening will care about the most.
That's it. That's it.
So the next one, we have kind of spoken about him extensively already, but probably one of the, similar to Arnie, a very young budding prospect for Australian football as a whole, and a phenomenal goal last season in that semi-final match. Riley McGree joins on a season-long loan from Club Bruges. What are your thoughts on his signing? And from what we can see, it looks like it's going to be a slightly change of role for him this year, playing more as a number 10 than that box-to-box midfielder he was for Newcastle last year.
Nice. Yeah. Well, I think he's already scored in the pre-season, hasn't he? So, and like he's set up Bruno as well. So like he's going reasonably well. I'm pretty excited about him. And yeah, like as much as it was bad to see him score against us, it was amazing. And like that's if you can ride off that, like football's about riding off, you know, momentum. So let's ride off that momentum, mate.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be interesting to see if he does have another seat, because he was fantastic, I think, in the second half of last year for Newcastle, and a big reason why they finished second in the league and why they made the grand final. But it'll be interesting to see if he has another full 12-month period like that, whether Bruges give him a chance actually in their squad and in their midfield, or if other European clubs come calling, or if he signs a similar deal with the City Football Group themselves. You'd have to think it's a loan with potentially a future option for a certain fee or something like that. The next one is Anthony Caceres. We did briefly mention him as well because we've also signed his wife Helen Caceres for the W League side. He has previously been at City on loan from Manchester City. He's an interesting one because he was always a talent and a prospect in his time at Central Coast. But I think of all the players that Manchester City has signed directly from the A-League, he's perhaps the weakest of the bunch. And I think that's come through in that he hasn't really found consistent football anywhere since joining the Manchester City family.
Yeah, well, I suppose as much as he thinks he has the X factor, hasn't really shown it that much. Like, he's I think he's got a lot of potential still, even though he's reasonably old too, isn't he? And like,
he's 25 now, I believe.
Yeah, he's not that old, but like, yeah, he is definitely not the most quality that Man City have picked up, but that is, I think that goes back to he was one of the first, wasn't he, where it was the buy and the loan back.
Yeah, they signed him at the same time as Luke Bratton. And I think it was with the idea that he would eventually move to a European club, but it just hasn't worked out because his nationality or his citizenship, I believe, is Uruguayan. He has Uruguayan parents, so he doesn't have the same access to a European visa the way that Luke Bratton does. So he wasn't able to go out and play for a championship side or play for a League One team or anything like that. His loans have been entirely within Asia, mainly to us, and also last year I think playing in Saudi Arabia. I could be wrong on that one, but something in that area. So interesting to see how like visas and passports and stuff can kind of play out for a person's career. But again, similar to you, I don't necessarily think he's better than Luke Bratton. I don't necessarily think he's better than Riley McGree or a couple of the other players that were picked up as well. So unless there's an injury or something like that, I'm not sure entirely what role Caceres would expect to play. And in reality, you can really only play him as a number 10 because that's all he essentially is. So, yeah, not a bad squad player to have, but certainly not setting anything on fire as far as I'm concerned. The next one is a little bit more exciting. I actually like him quite a bit, and I think he's been really good in pre-season. Lachlan Wales.
Well, you'd think he'd probably start in the top 11, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, he has been. He's been keeping Michael O'Hara out of the side even prior to his injury. He looks essentially to be either a right winger or a left winger and not a whole lot else. He reminds me a little bit of Bruce Kamau, where he's got all the physical tools and he's very quick and he works hard, but perhaps maybe doesn't have that, cross selection or that pass selection just yet.
Yeah, okay. I think I only seen him play a couple of times last year, but, I think he's a young Aussie, so he's got some potential for sure.
Yeah, I think he's the bolter. I think he's the one that we should expect to see line up in the first game of the season. And given that we have had Kamau and Fitzgerald go out, it is good to have that option out wide, though we have signed a couple others as well. The next one is Roston Griffiths, who has a long history in the league, Blackburn Rovers Junior over in England, and then came back to Central Coast, and most recently has been involved with Perth in the A-League before playing at Patakor Tashkent last season. He returns to the A-League as kind of that big midfield enforcer. We haven't really seen that type of player in the City lineup since Eric Pardelou left, and I was a massive fan of Eric Pardelou and the work he did. So how do you think Roston Griffiths will go in a similar position?
Yeah, definitely, like really good, and like he's he's been in the A League for a long time, so he's definitely a worthy admission, and yeah, I'm sure he'll get a lot of game time too.
The next one, another international signing, is Florian Berenguer, a French winger from ST Sochaux over in League 2, not League 1. He has been a couple of different clubs. I think he was also at Nice for a period, but I could be wrong. He looks pretty good. From the highlights package that came through in the last pre-season friendly in Shepparton against Western Sydney, he got a goal and an assist. I don't know if he's 100% fit yet, which is why I kind of back Lachlan Wales to start ahead of him, but if he can kind of get himself fit and accustomed to the league, he could be a quality signing. But again, a little bit of an unknown, but I think the track record is good with unknown wingers as they've come through, the likes of Harry Navillo and a few others spring to mind from our history.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's my question. Is he a fast Frenchman?
Yeah, I think he's a different type of player. He reminds me of, do you know Eric Bortiok from Brisbane Roar? Who's kind of
yeah. He's quite exciting to watch, that guy.
Yeah, so not lightning fast, but certainly got really good feet, good quick feet. So yeah, if he can get the similar sort of link up with Bruno Fornaroli, who I think perhaps last season lacked supply or lacked another creative player alongside him, could be a very interesting one to watch. But time will tell. I don't see him getting near the starting lineup for a good month or so as he continues to build up his fitness. So the next one, Mark Birigidi, obviously came through the A-League with Adelaide United and Newcastle Jets as a young goalkeeper. Got his big money move initially to Swansea over in the Premier League. It never really worked out for him before joining NAC Breda in the Eredivisie. He returns now on a free transfer to the A-League and a long-term contract. I think it's 4 or 5 years. We haven't probably had, a long-term goalkeeper for a while. Obviously, Thomas Sorensen was a phenomenal player, but joined us as a 40-year-old man. And then last year, it really looked like Galekovic or Buzanis, either one could get picked on any particular week. How important do you think it is to have a keeper that we can build around for the next few years?
Yeah, I think he's definitely a really good signing, and I don't think Eugene's gonna get his spot, to be honest. And it's really good. Like, I love the strong keepers that can control it from the back, like Sorensen did. And I reckon he's definitely got that in him. And yeah, watching him play as a opposition goalkeeper, he was definitely someone you didn't like. So it's good to have him on our side so that the opposition don't like him.
Yeah, for sure. It'll be interesting to see how he goes because he was actually the last signing that we made. Given that he has had like a shorter preseason. I know it's a little bit different for goalkeepers, and he obviously took part in a preseason over in Holland. It'll be interesting to see if he does line up this weekend in the Melbourne derby, but only time will tell with that one. The next one, joining as a marquee signing, again, second year in a row we've signed a big name player, or a big wage player from Aston Villa on loan. Ex-Manchester United junior, ex-Premier League title winner with Leicester, ex-Championship winner with Middlesbrough. Yeah. Richie DeLay. What are your thoughts on the big Belgian?
Yeah, well, once we left Jakobsen, once Jakobsen left, I was happy that we got another experienced defender. And, for it to be Richie DeLay, as some people might not know him, but, yeah, he's solid, very solid. So I'm very happy he's there.
He's got a real good YouTube highlights package. Of just clattering tackles and things like that.
Yeah, well, it's great. And him and Bart, that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he lines up. I think traditionally he's played as a right back in most of the Premier League sides he's played for. Obviously, A-League's a lot different, and he could potentially play as a central defender alongside Schenkerveld. I think what's interesting about this one, or not interesting, but the only flag potentially for it, when he made his debut against Western Sydney in that FFA Cup quarter-final defeat, he played as a left winger, and I know that Warren Joyce rates him incredibly highly, and one of the first things he said was that when he played Richie at left wing in a Manchester United reserve game. They won the league and he scored a hat-trick, but in reality he spent now probably a good 12 or at least a decade since then making his career as a defender and a fullback. I would like to see him get some consistency in that position and build from that position rather than kind of just used as a patchwork quilt player.
Exactly. Yeah, and like that's why you get someone like that. Really, it's like you use where their strengths are, so that's where they are. And like I suppose when you touch on the next guy, that's sort of where it comes to. Like he's there to support him as well.
We'll talk about him a little bit in a minute, but I think Warren Joyce is only going to... So last year, essentially, with the biggest budget in the league in terms of wage, we had a marquee player on 15k a week that we didn't play at all. If he does a similar thing with Richie Delaya and signs a marquee central defender from a big club like Aston Villa, albeit on loan, and then plays him out of position or tries to play him in midfield or really anywhere other than at centre-back or right-back, I think he's not just going to increase pressure on himself from the fans and the media and things like that, but I think people will start asking the questions within the City Football Group as well. So not trying to, be overly dramatic.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, that's sort of, you could elaborate that and say like, it's, you're not taking the A-League for a joke, that's why we're getting players like that to develop those positions, not to have like a star player that, takes over.
So I think the interesting thing about signing him as well is that the City Football Group kind of came out and said that they're not going to look to sign big name foreign marquees, which... So there's two lines of thinking with this. There's part of me that thinks signings like this one are really good because they'll make the quality of the overall league better. And I think a lot of other clubs in the other season previews we've done have made similar signings where it's not necessarily like it's going to set the world on fire, but the overall quality of the league is going to grow. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't get more tickets sold, doesn't get more season memberships sold. You're in a similar boat where you're still yet to renew. It's a strange one to see.
That's, I suppose, the problem too. One of the problems with the league.
But then we also saw Splash the Catch and obviously, have a little bit go our way in terms of the guest player rule for Tim Cahill. And do you think that maybe influences a little bit, that they maybe didn't get the revenue back that they expected to get from that big outlay?
Yeah, I reckon it does. And but it's sort of, I don't know, you needed input to get the output, and it was, it did, I don't know, I sort of don't know where to go with Tim Cahill if you want to talk about that.
I think
it didn't really work out as well as we thought.
Yeah, I think we'll do a whole podcast later on in the season about footballers, quote unquote, tarnishing their legacy, and I'm sure he'll be a big chunk of it. Lucas Neal, I think, is in a similar boat, and a few others as well. The last one, just to close it off from the players in, is Curtis Good. Obviously, he was at Newcastle United for a long time, initially signed from Melbourne Heart on a 6-year contract that finally finished this past year. He's still only 24, believe it or not. Has a horrible, horrible track record with injuries during his time at Newcastle. He will be the only player involved in the squad this year that came through the Melbourne Heart structure. Do you think this is a second chance and a second opportunity for Curtis Good, or do you think this is a token gesture to kind of keep the old Melbourne Heart faithful on side with the losses of Stephen Mork and a couple other players that have gone on to bigger and better things?
Well, I think he played really well when he was young for us, and I liked him, and I'm sure you did. A lot of people did, and he didn't. I think he went on a bit when he was at Newcastle, and he played a bit there, and it was I reckon that the City Football Group or Melbourne Heart Group, the people within there have monitored him and they've seen him grow reasonably. But he's probably another one of the Aussies that hasn't shone through there. But I think coming back with more experience from Europe, he's going to be better than what he was, and he'll be happy to be home. And he's good. He's pretty fucking good. He's Curtis Good.
Yeah, if you can get him fit and back to somewhere near the potential player that he was, when he left, I think he and Schenkerveld as a left-footed, right-footed centre-back combo, which I absolutely love, and Jameson on one full-back position and Richie Delayed on the other, that is a mean-looking defence, but it depends entirely on how his body goes, and obviously, what the intentions are of the management group. I'd say at the moment he's probably not in the starting 11, but I would love to see him get back there.
Perfect. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely
so
same.
so that takes us through our players in. What do you make overall of the transfer business that we've done? It's a similar amount of players going out. A lot of the players that are going out are either players that were turning 21, 22, all the way up to 25 with Nick Fitzgerald that were perhaps no longer promising youngsters or no longer high potential players. Do you think we've got a good enough mix of experienced talent and promising youngsters in the replacements that we've signed?
Yeah, definitely. I reckon we've done pretty well. Like compared to other years, we've got like more interest. Like there's a lot more players to look at and be interested in and see what happens. So
Yeah.
yeah, like I'm reasonably happy.
I think the other one as well that's fascinating is that it's not, there's only one player signed from another A-League squad. Like it's not like every other year where it's a merry-go-round of us just giving opportunities to any half-decent young player in the league. We've only signed Lachlan Wales from Central Coast. Everyone else is either an international player coming in or an Australian that's been abroad and is looking to get another opportunity in the A-League itself. The likes of Curtis Good, Birigidi, Anthony Caceres, Riley McGree. Like these are players that have been out there in Europe playing, hopefully playing at those levels and are
Yeah,
looking to try and get consistency for either another move or Socceroos selection or whatever it happens to be. So when you look at it, like it kind of in the little box that you and I have written it down in, it does look nice. I think while we haven't made a big name signing like a Keisuke Honda or an Ola Toivonen for like the mob down the road, certainly
yeah.
a tidy looking transfer window, at least on paper, but unfortunately the game's not played on paper, so it still remains to be seen how it plays out.
Well, that's it. Yeah, and I suppose, as you say, like the players we've still got, I think it's going to be interesting. It should be good.
Yeah. So our two marquees for the season, Bruno Fornaroli, we haven't really touched on him yet, and Richie Delayet. Richie Delayet, I think he has potential to be an elite level defender in this competition, whether he's here for the long haul or just for a season, or what Ryan Joyce's intentions are. We spoke about briefly. Important do you think Bruno Fornaroli has been to us? Not just, I think, in and like his on-field performance, but really since the day that he signed and began playing and obviously breaking that goal scoring record in his first season. How important do you think it is for City Football Group to have a superstar talent or a league star within their roster and within the club?
Yeah, well, Bruno he is the most important player for sure. Like he was like definitely captain worthy. Like he has been injured, so it's good to hand the captaincy over, I suppose. But literally, yeah, he's on his when he plays, like which is consistently, and he's unstoppable. Like he's amazing, and he's plays for the team and for the club and for the fans, and yeah, he's an absolute asset to have.
I think the interesting part as well is that the club obviously has players that they rate very highly. I think they're all a massive rap on Luke Bratton, and feedback that I've heard is that
Yeah,
everybody loves and enjoys working with him and thinks his quality is phenomenal. But also the fact that we had Ross McCormack, we had the potential to keep Ross McCormack after Tim Cahill left. And then they were like, no, we're fine. We've got Bruno coming back. So obviously the club and the City Football Group as a whole has massive faith in him to carry the company.
oh yeah.
To carry the
And
club.
he literally, yeah, he's out of our whole existence. He's definitely our best striker we've ever had.
Yeah,
Like,
oh, no, phenomenal.
for
And I
sure.
think he's probably got a bit of a chip on his shoulder now that Bobo has broken his goal scoring record for a season. So if he can get up towards 27 this year and even maybe go one better and get 28, I think it marks us having a pretty phenomenal year and making it relatively deep into the postseason as well. He does have 2 goals in his last 2 competitive appearances, so fingers crossed it's the prickly pear is back on form and Altoona is getting amongst it at Amy Park again this season.
Yes,
So an interesting one that only just
please,
came out
yes.
throughout the course of this week. We have changed captain. Bruno Fornaroli was captain for a little bit, and then kind of half him being injured and half, I think, punishment for his famous FFA Cup post-game speech where he flew his cards in the air and told everyone to fuck off. Last season it was Michael Jakobsen was the club captain, and that was how they got around it. This year, it has been handed to Scott Jameson, the left back who obviously has phenomenal experience coming through the Bolton Wanderers junior structure in England and then returning to the A-League for the likes of Adelaide, Perth, Sydney FC briefly, Western Sydney Wanderers, of course, and now Melbourne City. What are your thoughts on that appointment?
Yeah, well, I think he's definitely a leader, and last year he was huge, I think, with the fans as well, integrating the fans with the club and everything. And I suppose, like, looking at someone to captain the club, if you're as a group talking about it. Like he just has such good leadership qualities and such good people skills that they couldn't really go past him as someone that can bring, the club and the fans together as well, and obviously run the boys.
Yeah,
So yeah,
obviously.
I think like it's a pretty good. Like he's happy to do it, and I don't think he really wanted to do it, but he was offered it and he loved it. So yeah, good on him.
Yeah, there's a cool little video on the Melbourne City Twitter at the moment with him talking about it and what it means to him. He came back to the A-League last season after getting his international transfer from Western Sydney to Gothenburg in Sweden. I think that's the right club, or I'm probably butchering that pronunciation. Apologies to any Swedish fans of the show that might be listening. But he returned to be closer to his family. I think his brother was having some personal issues. So he signed a 5-year deal. He's still got 4 years remaining. Still only 29. So potentially the club's left back position is locked down for the next few years. I quite like him as a player. I respected him a lot and feared him a little bit when he came with other sides, particularly Western Sydney. But he definitely has that little bit of gremlin in him where, like he can get involved in a scrap and he can kind of get distracted
Yeah,
by his own running battles. So it'll be interesting to see how the armband affects him and if he does, retain a bit more lead by doing and lead by fire rather than, the sort of individual things that can happen when you're a bit of a firebrand like that. So, yeah, I don't disagree with it as
yeah.
well.
Well, I think him and Bratton are pretty similar in that case where they can get under the opposition's skin. So
Yeah.
hopefully that works to our advantage.
Yeah, if you were going to ask me who would be the most likely, I really thought they would try and push it to Bart Schenkerveld and get him to sign a longer term deal. Um, but I dare say if Schenkerveld performs at the same high level he did last season, he's going to start looking for marquee wages. And whether that's at Melbourne City or if he's going to try
Yeah.
and make a return back to Europe, obviously being Dutch himself, it'll be very interesting to see. But I thought he'd be a decent shout for captain this season once it kind of came out that it potentially wasn't going to be Fornaroli again. So, yeah, time will tell on that one. The next one is the manager and staff. We have briefly spoken about Warren Joyce, and he's now appointed a new assistant in Tony Vidmar. Tony Vidmar obviously having an extensive career himself throughout Europe and then returning to finish his career in the A-League in a very good Central Coast Mariners side. So very familiar. He's been around for a long time and obviously very talented, also being
Old
involved in...
Soccer.
Yeah, being involved with the young Socceroos as well. And Warren Joyce, in his second season, like it's easy to forget. I think sometimes we can be very critical. He did lead the league. He did lead the club to its highest ever finish last year, and we were essentially, a scorpion goal away from a grand final appearance, which I'm sure eats away at him more than it does any of us. What were your thoughts on his first season as a coach, and what do you think we should expect to see from him and them as a coaching duo in the 18-19 season?
Yeah, well, I think like when he was signed, a lot of people were like, "What are you doing?" He's got like the wrong ideas of the City Football Group and all that sort of stuff.
And
But
I think what
you
hurt
know, I
him
suppose
there,
I
I think what hurt him there as well is that he had a really unsuccessful spell prior to signing with us with Wigan Athletic over in England, where they essentially got relegated on the back of his start to the season.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, like, I think he done pretty well. Like to come to Australia and like it's a totally different league. You got to move your whole family, all that sort of stuff. Like I reckon he done all right, and like he's got some good grit about him, which I like. And now appointing Vidmar like just to get that sort of Australian experience in there. Like I think it's a pretty good duo. Like it'll be interesting to watch for sure. Well, I think who did we lose last year? Was it Callag's gone, hasn't he?
Sorry, Zelsko Kalach, the goalkeeping coach, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, was he?
No, so he's
Yeah, he was
joined. We
gone,
had
wasn't
Jess Van Stratton.
Oh, he joined.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
the year
okay. Yeah.
before, John Didaluca?
He was at yeah.
No, I can't remember who it was. Whichever one the Croatian one is, that grabbed Stefan Mork by the neck and got sacked. So we've had three goalkeeping coaches in 3 years, all of them relatively prominent. But yeah, it should now be Zelsko Kalac, who obviously has a long record of working with Tony Popovic in the A-League, and obviously ex-AC Milan goalkeeper, was a decent player in his time. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, because I would have thought for all money, if there was a player, like if there was a coaching duo sticking together, you'd probably see Kalac join Popovic at Perth Glory, but it hasn't worked out that way. I think Warren Joyce, this will be a real make or break season for him. I think he does have still another year. He signed a 3-year contract initially, But this is the first preseason, I think, where he's actually gotten to make his own signings and build his own squad. Like last year, we had a couple of players on, 2-year deals that were due to finish up. We obviously, Tim Cahill wasn't a signing that I think Warren Joyce would have made himself. Obviously, that one was driven a bit more by the commercial aspect of things for both the league and the club as it tries to grow. I think expectations will increase for him, and I think even though we have gotten incrementally better and at various points last season we were very good to watch, certainly expectations for him this season are title challenge, top 2 finish, or he'll be showing the door.
Yeah. Likewise, I reckon the same.
All right, so we've kind of, because we are both City fans, it makes it a little bit difficult for me to be impartial, and I think I pretty much threw that one out the window a minute in. Who do you think this season will be the one to watch? It may not necessarily be a breakout star, but who do you think will be the most important player to City's fortunes this year?
I'd probably like to think Richie Delap. He can bring the experience, obviously. And, I'd probably have to pick him and McGree.
Yeah, I think McGree will be a massive one. The tough one with this is that there's quite a few players you could argue for in a variety of ways. I could see Mark Burgiddy getting back to being an elite level goalkeeper in the league itself. I could see Curtis Good getting back to that level. You could see Lachlan Wales having a breakout year and keeping some of those big name marquees out of the side. Always
Bruno.
Yeah, Bruno, like he's definitely going to have a chip on his shoulder after missing so much last season with that broken ankle. Like, it's an exciting time, but in reality, we probably need a good 4 or 5 of those people to continue the level they're currently performing, like Schenkerveld, like Jameson, whoever else. And then if everyone gets contributing, gets on the same page, we can actually challenge the 2 big sides, I think, for this season, Melbourne Victory and Sydney FC, as they so often are, and some of the good work that they've done building on already impressive structures. So, yeah, massive season ahead. I think Riley McGree is a great shout. I'm going to sneakily suggest Lachlan Wales to be a bit of a breakout star this year.
Nice.
What about the one to hate? Who do you think is going to be the player? Like, obviously, we hear all the time about, his name, Bruno Roland Fawley, or whatever people say in comment sections. And obviously, Scott Jameson, Luke Bratton were both fiery characters at various times. We heard about them before. Who do you think will be the one to hate that other teams rock up at Amy Park just to continually boo?
Well, I was going to say Jamison before he got the captaincy, but now I think he might sort of chill out a bit, so I'll just have to obviously go back to Bratton.
Yeah, I was going to say Michael O'Halloran. I thought he'd be a fiery Scottish winger, but obviously we're not going to see him now for a good 10 weeks or so. But fingers crossed he can come back and kind of be everything that we needed. I don't think we've really had that sort of either wide midfield danger since Navio left. I thought for a while Fernando Brandan might be it, but it didn't obviously work out that well for him. And maybe Michael O'Halloran, when he gets fit, can be that player for us and be that kind of wide creative influence that I think Bruno's been crying out for over the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, definitely.
So the big question for us is, can we finally find consistency and maintain a title challenge? We've never won more than 13 games in a course of a season. Given that there is only 27 games in a season, that's not that great a record. Never been more than 50% wins. We had the fewest draws of any team last year with 4, which meant that we either lost games late or we won games late and nothing in between. We have consistently also struggled after the Christmas period. So, like, we've had good FFA Cup runs, we've had good starts to the season, and then in that middle third, we've struggled. So what do you think is key to us finding that consistency that's required for a title challenge, and how do you think Warren Joyce will go about it?
I think it's being rid of the disappointing losses, like the losses where, we look like we're creative, we look like we're in the game the whole game, and then somehow we just seem to lose. And that's not what I want to see anymore. And even away, we look really good when we play away sometimes, and we somehow lose it. It's just, I suppose that's my point for it. Yeah, just be rid of the disappointing losses.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if this my mentality needs to shift from being Heart to being City, but there's still venues that I just can't remember us winning at. I can't remember us beating Western Sydney Wanderers in Parramatta. Obviously, they're playing away at the moment. I can't remember us ever winning in Perth.
No, well, I think we did win one. It was like a 3-2 or something.
Yeah, but like, you know, we
A while
never,
ago. Yeah, it's
like you
just
say that you couldn't say that about a Sydney or a Victory. They don't really have
nah,
anyone like
exactly. Well,
that.
the only memorable away was when we beat Brisbane when they were on that run. We
Yeah,
beat them away. That was probably our biggest away win we've ever had.
mate, that was the Dave Williams, Mate Giganjic, Ian Ramsey days. Those were not times I look back
Sure.
on that fondly, but they were fun. We were always guaranteed goals in any game we played in, usually conceding them, but still. All right, so the next one for us, which is the elephant in the room, and I think it's perhaps a question levelled at the group for quite a while. It's now the fifth season as the City Football Group, overtaking the time the club spent as Melbourne Heart. Should they have won more than just one FFA Cup trophy by now, given the significant investment in facilities and players and the stuff that we've talked about?
Yeah. Well, I reckon we probably should have. Yeah, and I suppose it's just that's the way of football, though. It's just sometimes it doesn't go your way. Like a lot of it, like as much as it's preparation and that, like it does come down to a bit of luck, and we haven't had much luck. We haven't got that sort of bit of a hoodoo on us, but like to get the FFA Cup was great, and yeah, hopefully this year, considering we're not in the FFA Cup anymore, and yeah, we didn't get the Asian Championship spot, we can buckle down and try and get the title chase, whether it's the Dunny seat or the league or both.
Yeah, I know I'm supposed to be the impartial host and whatever else, but I kind of agree with exactly what you're saying. I think if you said we won the league within our first 5 seasons as Melbourne City, that sounds okay. But if we don't win, be that a premiership or a grand final this year, I think people start
Yeah,
looking at it as being, like I think obviously the City Football Group in England showed that they are in it for the long haul and they are invested in the programs above and beyond just coming in and winning as much as possible. They are building academies and they're building stadiums and all that sort of stuff. And we've seen them essentially go out into markets like the MLS and make big money signings, bringing in Lampard, Pirlo, David Villa, and now as a group they're getting away from that and trying to develop consistently, talent in that region to make profit out of the sale of those players. So, while yes, the group is changing, and obviously that changes the expectations a little bit, I do think, given everything we have going for us and the squad that I think we've put together this year, it looks to me like one of the strongest squads we've had in the course of the league itself. Or like even if you take out the unknowns like the O'Hallorans, the Barangays, Richie DeLaya, it's still a really, really, really good squad made up entirely of A-League talent or proven A-League talent in the form of internationals that have played here before. I think if
yeah,
we
exactly.
aren't,
And like, wasn't the good thing about it was too like just we had that pull as well, being connected to them. Like a lot of the good young kids wanted to come, what still want to come to play for our club,
yeah,
which
for
is,
sure. Like I think
I
Lachlan
think,
Wales probably
I
could
think
have.
that's probably like one of the biggest things to come from it as well. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I think they recognise that it is a platform to move on to other things because they've seen the likes of Aaron Moy, they've seen the likes of Daniel Arzani get these sort of dream moves. Time will tell whether the Arzani one works out in his favour. I think it still will. Aaron Moy is obviously is the fairy tale for I think a lot of decent players in the A-League, particularly like we read through our squad list. There's a lot of people in there that started their careers as juniors coming through European systems but never made the first team cut. And I think Aaron Moy is the best example of that. Obviously getting cut from Bolton and playing loan football with St Mirren in Scotland and then coming back. And then, obviously taking his game to another level while he was here. Like, there's definitely a definitive pathway that's been established through the City Football Group back to Europe or into Socceroos setups or whatever else. And I think that adds value above and beyond the financial investment. But with that, you'd have to say, like, if we're not like an unfortunate top two finish, or at least making a grand final. I'm not necessarily saying we have to win it, but we at least need
yeah,
to
yeah,
make an appearance in one to really sort
yeah,
of break
exactly.
that upper echelon. So, yeah, fingers crossed, obviously, but expectations this year should be, I think, probably bigger than any season prior.
Yeah, I agree, and yeah, for sure.
So we are in a unique situation here where I've renewed my membership because I forgot about that I had the auto renew on. You're yet to ahead of the first weekend. What do you think your membership pitch would be? Obviously, we've spoken about quite a bit of the exciting stuff happening around the club. If you were going to make a pitch to members similar to yourself that haven't renewed yet, or maybe football fans within Melbourne that are looking at a team for the first time, why should they pick Melbourne City over Melbourne Victory? And what's your membership pitch for the season ahead?
Well, obviously, I don't know. I couldn't tell you, man.
That's fair enough. I can have a crack at it.
So I could tell you, well, what I'll do, mate, is I'll tell you Melbourne City's pitch from their website.
Okay, yeah, you can
right
read it
here,
off.
right here, right now. Okay, so this is the membership slogan. And then there's some talk of occupying seats in stands to inspire the club to greater heights. So we all know about occupying seats in Amy Park.
The Green Seat Elite.
How we've been, yes. And, obviously being the minority in a predominantly Melbourne Victory town, we're happy enough to just ebb along, but, there's all this talk of expansion, there's a lot of talk going around, and it's like, as much as I have allegiance to Melbourne City, like, they don't reach out as much as I'd, assume they should. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's at that stage where you question it, and it's like, I'm gonna renew, obviously, and the people out there that want to renew, I suppose it's up to you if you want to spend your weekends to support them and see if they can get through it.
I think the fascinating bit for me is that they've never lent into the Green Seat Elite thing and had that be the catchphrase, join the Green Seat Elite. Because let's be honest, we're probably still another 5,000 members from ever having to open the top tier outside of a Melbourne derby. But we did crack 10k last year. We finished the season.
Well, yeah, and you can go into the whole thing, the change from Melbourne Heart to Melbourne City, and how that was all done, and it's just. It sort of changes perspectives of a whole club, and a lot of people support them because they were the heart, but we move on. But we move on with transparency, and FIFA 19's not quite transparent on their away kit, so I can't play.
Yeah,
I can't play Ultimate Team, mate. I can't play Ultimate Team in my red and white stripes. I'll use my black, which is the third kit. So,
surely
is this the beginning of the end?
There's got to
be. Are they kicking us out?
There has to be a patch coming. I'll put it up. I'll put it on Twitter, and I'll patch at EA Sports and see if we can get the rightful red and white away kit in there. I think what's fascinating is that, if I was going to frame one, and I don't work in marketing in any way, but it'd be something along the lines of we have the best facilities, we have the best players, we have the best fans. Now all that's missing is the memories and the trophies. So the best times for the club are still to come, which is, I think, probably the most exciting way to look at it. And for me, it's always been great value. $200. Obviously, I'm up and down.
What is it? I think it's we got 13 home matches this year. It's $290 for an adult, $180 for a concession, and $65 for a junior.
Yeah.
So it's reasonably priced, and the number one thing that kept me going back, which should keep most people going back, is going to catch up with your mates on the weekend and chat about the week and have a beer and cheer on your team. So I suppose that's the reality of it. Bring your kids too, bring them all, show them the beautiful game. Yeah,
it's the only stadium you can change ends at half time in as an A-League member. But yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. And then obviously if things go the way, we'll have another expansion episode, and I'm happy to invite you back on, Mick. But if things go the way of Team 11, obviously it'll be a very different preview that we do next year, and a very different outlook for yourself, I'm sure. So what is your season expectation? Yes. Where do you think Melbourne City is going to finish this year?
Well, yeah, I'm 1 or 2 with you, and I think, I don't know, I reckon Western Sydney have got a good chance of fighting as well. I'll put them up there with an expectation. But yeah, first or second for sure.
Yeah, I think premiership, but then we don't win the grand final. And Victory probably wins it against us because that's just what they do. So what about for the rest of the league? If we would apply it to the whole of the league, who do you think is going to be the main challengers for the title this year, and who do you think is really going to struggle and be propping up the rest of the league at the bottom of the table?
Well, as I said, yeah, Western Sydney for sure, and Sydney, and then yeah, how I don't know. I suppose I don't really know, but how are the Jets going to go again this year?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. So Ernie Merrick, their manager, obviously yo-yoed quite a bit when he was at Melbourne Victory and had one good year and one bad year and whatever else. I don't know if that'll continue, but they look to be playing pretty much the exact same brand of football as last year. So, and they've probably got a couple of extra pieces as well that they need to fit into that particular jigsaw. So they're kind of an unknown, but I think it'll be what is essentially now the big three: Sydney FC, Melbourne Victory, and ourselves up towards the top of the table.
Sorry. I forget about Victory. They're blank in my mind sometimes. But yeah, they'll go all right.
They'll go okay, but they're top heavy. They'll finish top four, but I don't think they'll win the title. So,
yeah, and then I suppose I want to mention, I don't think Wellington will go that great, but Davey Williams is down there, isn't he? Did he go down there?
Yeah, he's come back from Hungary and he's gone across. They've only got 18 players at the moment, so it's essentially a Sunday League squad in the amount of people they've got available. So you'd like to think they're going to continue to sign players in the lead up to the new season, but it'll be interesting to see how things play out for them in particular, given that they are under so much scrutiny. Like when we have these conversations about expansion and whatever else, and talk about great bids like Wollongong and Team 11, and the fact that Brisbane and Perth would probably love second teams, and Canberra and Tassie don't have teams at all. The fact that the Wellington Phoenix are currently using one of the licences, it only increases pressure on them. And I don't necessarily think they've done enough this off-season to kind of placate that pressure from the media or from the fans or whatever else. So, I think you're right on the money as always, Michael. Okay, so round one fixture, obviously the Melbourne Derby this Saturday night at Marvel Stadium. What do you think the score will be, and who do you think will be the scorers?
2-1, and I'll like to say Bruno, and then probably Bruno again, and then I don't really mind who score for Victory. We'll probably score for him, give him an own goal or something.
Yeah, I think we'll score and we'll play a very good defensive performance and beat them. Probably McGree or Fornaroli getting amongst the goals. But I think Keisuke Honda will score a free kick, and even though they lose, it'll all be that no one will talk about anything other than that. And City will win, but it'll still be Melbourne Victory and Keisuke Honda on the back page of the Herald Sun the following weekend. But should be a very interesting clash. They've obviously got a lot of new signings they're trying to integrate in, as do we. But yeah, I think it's fitting and setting up to be a phenomenal season, not just in Melbourne with the two clubs going head to head, but for the A-League as a whole. I think the standard of quality has risen across the league.
And is this the first time it's the in round one?
No, we usually rotate with Sydney FC. So, the Sydney Derby. So there's usually either a Melbourne Derby or a Sydney Derby very early in the season. Sometimes it's not round one, but it's usually in the first couple of weeks at least. It's so we can always line up the second one as being that Christmas Derby, the now traditional Christmas Derby.
Yes, definitely. The Jonathan Germano Derby.
Yep. The Johnny G, the hidden Santa hat in his underwear that he's been running around with attached to his groin for 65 minutes before he finds that goal. It's horrendous that he's putting that on his head. And he's actually still performing at a really good level with Avondale in the NPL, but that's another episode again. Thanks very much for joining me, Mick. I really do appreciate it, man. I can't wait for the season to get started and obviously to catch up with you every weekend at Amy Park and to have a couple of beers along the way. Do you have your Twitter or Instagram or anything that you'd like to share with the viewers so that they can follow you and follow Melbourne City's travels throughout the course of this season?
Yeah, mate. I'm just at HumoB, HUMOB. And yeah, likewise, mate. It was great having a chat and look forward to seeing you on the weekend.
Yeah, and there will be links to Michael's relevant pages and the Melbourne City Supporters group on Facebook in the description below. But more than anything, we really do thank and appreciate you guys for listening. If you're listening on YouTube, it is InTheMixer_podcast. Please subscribe to the channel on SoundCloud at InTheMixer_podcast, or you can follow along and be kept up to date on all the great content we put forward, as well as updates on future videos as they come out on Twitter at InTheMixer_pod. There will be links in the description to each of those pages and channels below. But as always, I've been Sean. I cannot wait for the A-League season to start, and I'll see you all again in the mixer.